Remember when George Clooney's character in the Gravity movie sacrificed himself, unhooked himself from the cable, and flew off into outer space? That's only a movie. But what if that happened in real life? What will happen to an astronaut who gets lost in outer space? And have there really been such cases? You're about to find out. As you know, while on a space station, astronauts sometimes have to leave it to conduct inspections, repairs, or research. Of course, they leave the station in their spacesuits, but their oxygen supply is limited, so any misstep can lead to death. One such misstep could be a spacewalk. A tether and a partner are, in fact, all an astronaut can hope for while outside the space station. And in this case, literally centimeters are decisive. Even if the astronaut accidentally lets go of the tether and moves only half a meter away from the station, they can already be carried into outer space. The body in weightlessness continues infinite motion around its axis, and if the astronaut doesn't have time to grab a partner's hand or the rope, they're doomed. The trajectory of movement depends on the last push from the surface, so a lost astronaut has three options. The first is the most optimistic. Modern spacesuits have special jetpacks that can be used to change the trajectory of movement, for example, to prevent rotation, to stop, or to try to move forward. In this case, an astronaut can still save themselves by going back to the station. If not, they have two more options. In the second option, they head towards Earth, fall into the gravitational field, and begin to fall through the dense layers of the atmosphere. No parachutes needed, as a sharp entry into the atmosphere will kill the astronaut even before they fall to the ground. In the third option, the astronaut flies into outer space. Oxygen's limited and there's no hope of rescue, so the astronaut will live as long as they have something to breathe. After death, the astronaut's body will float in space for some time, but eventually radiation will begin to destroy it. Eventually, when the integrity of the spacesuit is compromised, the rapid expansion of the air remaining in the suit will cause a small explosion, destroying the suit and the body inside it. As far as real cases are concerned, not all astronauts have returned home alive. Since 1961, 18 people have died in spaceflights. 13 Americans, 1 Israeli, and 4 Soviet astronauts. The disasters occurred either during the launch of spacecraft or during their return from orbit. The statistics are disappointing, but they could have been even worse. For example, Alexei Leonov, the first man to enter outer space, could have died in a space orbit. His spacesuit bulged and he couldn't return to the Voskhod 2 spaceship for a long time. Vladimir Vyazhutin, a member of the crew of Soyuz T-14, had a severe attack of prostatitis in orbit, so he had to abruptly terminate the entire operation and return to Earth. The Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano almost choked to death when his helmet began to fill unexpectedly with water due to a faulty cooling system. Space is far from being as romantic and cool a place as many people think, and what happened or could happen to the astronauts proves this well. But that's not the only reason space is creepy and sinister. Stay tuned for even more interesting and frightening facts about space that will make you see it differently. As you probably know, the first living creature to fly into space was not a man, but an animal. More precisely, there were numerous launches of several animals to learn more about the possibility of spaceflight. At first, some testers didn't even think about how animals could return, so unfortunately, many of the animals died in space. Ships with their bodies, or what's left of them, may still orbit the Earth. The bodies of animal victims of space decompose more slowly in this dark abyss than on our planet. A number of factors come into play here, from the oxygen in the spaceship to the temperature of space. By the way, what about temperature? We all know it's cold in space, but how cold is it there? It's not so clear-cut. In low Earth orbit, for example, the temperature is quite comfortable, from -4 to +45 degrees Celsius. If you take the average, it's essentially room temperature. However, in outer space, in an absolute vacuum, it's incredibly cold. The temperature there is about -270 degrees Celsius. This is practically the lowest temperature that's possible in the universe, because the absolute zero on the Kelvin scale is -273 degrees Celsius. Space is frightening, not only because of the incredible cold, but also because of the absolute silence. Such silence can be experienced in the anechoic chamber in the Orfield laboratories. It absorbs up to 99.99% of sounds.
It's a
But
flash of
even
light.
there, you can't hear complete silence. It'll be disturbed by the work of the lungs and circulatory system. That is, you'll literally hear the blood flowing through your veins. In space, there's no sound at all, because it doesn't spread in a vacuum. No wonder George Lucas is so hated for the space battle scenes in Star Wars. It's not very realistic to look at scenes where Imperial fighters are firing loudly in a vacuum. But let's not pick on sci-fi movies. In reality, though, there is no sound in space, and that's not just scary in and of itself. Astronauts can be hurt by it. Just a few minutes in a sound vacuum causes panic attacks and severe auditory hallucinations in unprepared people. So astronauts are very carefully prepared for space missions. Generally speaking, an astronaut's job is not an easy one. You go into space for several months, you flounder in zero gravity, you cannot rest, eat, or sleep adequately, and you also start experiencing health problems. For example, a few years ago, scientists proved that the eyesight in space is severely impaired. Because of the conditions and characteristics of space, astronauts' eyeballs become deformed, so this can lead to some vision complications when they return home. The fluid around the brain may increase to the point that the astronaut's eyes may swell. An astronaut can become nearsighted while in space, even if they went into orbit with 20/20 vision. Myopia persists after arriving on Earth, but it passes with time. Astronauts have problems not only with their eyesight. While in space, their skin literally begins to fall off. Staying in zero gravity affects the skin. Its thickness decreases, so after about a month in orbit, calluses begin to fall off from astronauts, and dead and thick skin actively peels off. This in itself is unpleasant, but the skin also hangs around the station, turning it into chaos. In addition, muscles begin to atrophy in space because there's no gravitational force. In addition, bones lose their calcium and become less dense and strong. Astronauts need to exercise daily so they don't become frail. Such difficulties must make astronauts want to cry. After all, you can't just fly out of space. It's not a flight from one country to another, but people in orbit should show courage and fortitude. Crying in space is a bad idea, and Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield will show you that. As you can see, the liquid just collects around the eye like a bubble. Because of the lack of gravity, the tears won't flow down, so the astronaut will have to walk around with these bubbles around their eyes and sob bitterly. This is not such a problem on the station. Tears can be wiped away with a hand or a napkin. But crying during spacewalks is categorically not recommended. Being in a spacesuit, an astronaut will not be able to wipe their tears. Tear bubbles around their eyes will make them practically blind, which may affect the success of the mission in outer space or even cost the astronaut their life. Chris Hadfield had such an experience himself, but fortunately he solved the problem of tears in outer space with the help of the people at the Mission Control Center on Earth. Unpleasant facts are associated not only with astronauts but also with celestial bodies. Our natural satellite, for example, is gradually moving away from Earth. However, it's happening very slowly, at a rate of 38 millimeters per year. So this news cannot be called frightening. The fact is rather interesting. Researchers calculated that 1.5 billion years ago, Earth's day lasted about 18 hours. At that time, the Moon was 44,000 kilometers closer to Earth than it is now. According to astrophysicists, the increased distance influenced the rotation of the planet around its axis, as well as the climate and the duration of the day. In a few billion years, the Moon's orbit will approximately double, and the day will stretch for 870 hours. But I think there will be no people left by then. Well, in the meantime, you and I are still alive and still living on Earth. It's already often unsafe here, but dangers can also come from outer space. A solar or geomagnetic storm is one of the most terrifying things that can happen to us at any time. Such storms represent a disturbance of the geomagnetic field for a period of time. In 1921, a geomagnetic storm knocked out half the equipment on the New York Central Railroad and left almost the entire east coast of the United States without communications. Even then, the consequences were palpable. Nowadays, when the whole world is tied to electronics, a geomagnetic storm can lead to disastrous consequences and ruin thousands of lives. Venus doesn't care about solar storms. This neighbor of Earth is not spoken about as often as Mars, but Venus is one of the most unusual and creepy planets, not only in the solar system but in the universe in general. Although Venus is similar to Earth in composition and size, its appearance and surface conditions are quite different. Venus's atmosphere consists of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid vapor. The surface temperature exceeds 450 degrees Celsius, which is enough to melt zinc or lead. In addition, because the atmosphere of Venus rotates 60 times faster than the surface of the planet, the wind speed here is up to 500 kilometers per hour. It's a scary planet. Although Mars is farther away, it's much more welcoming. But even Venus is not as creepy a planet as Kelt 9b. It's also one of the most frightening planets in the universe because it's a living hell. Literally. Kelt 9b is the hottest known exoplanet. The temperature on its daytime side reaches 4,300 degrees Celsius. Even some stars are cooler than this planetary scorcher. Kelt 9b is a crazy and very strange planet altogether. For example, winter and summer change here twice in 36 hours. When the planet is above the pole of the star, it's summer here. And when it moves to the equatorial zone, it's winter here. Then the planet hits the opposite pole of the star and summer begins again. Each of these seasons lasts about 10 hours, but there's not much difference between winter and summer because it's always fiercely hot on Kelt 9b. By the way, Kelt 9b is 620 light-years from Earth. That's very far away. Somewhere out there, very far away in the universe, there's not only strange planets but also black holes. Everyone knows about them. But did you know that there are also white holes? Their existence has not yet been 100% proven, but scientists suggest that they may represent the exact opposite of black holes. If black holes suck everything into them and don't let even light out, the white holes, on the contrary, don't absorb anything. Nothing can enter them, but they spew out matter. According to one hypothesis, the Big Bang was the result of an explosion of a white hole. That's all, guys. Would you like to go to space? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you later.